Great to see you all. Some familiar faces popping up there. Although I saw some new or unfamiliar names anyway on the as you were in the waiting room. So hopefully we've got some. It's always good to have some first time digital drummers on. So let us know in the chat which one you are. But either way, it's good to see you. It's been a while. It's one of our longer breaks between these tastings, but we're going to keep them coming thick and fast for the rest of the year. So yeah, great to see you jumping back on. This is a really exciting one tonight for anyone who doesn't know. We're gonna be some of the first people in the world to try the new 2025 Loch Lomond Open special releases. They're not even out yet. At the end of this call, you'll be able to buy them on pre-order. They officially come out on the 8th of April. So you're the first people in the world. Well, I don't know about the very first, Andy, but they're one of the first to get their hands on it. So yeah, that's an exciting one. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we do encourage as much chat, comment, and debate. I can see that people are popping in the chat there already. So we want feedback on the whiskey. Any questions for Andy? Do keep them coming. We're also actually, Andy, a bit of a segue before we start. I'll be meeting your sort of Loch Lomond group colleague, Ashley Smith, tomorrow for a little podcast interview. I'm not sure if we've got we've had it for a while, but it's been more active recently. So I hope people on the call have been listening along. But we have our W Club Decanted podcast, and we're interviewing her tomorrow. That should be out next week to discuss her role in blending at Glen Scotia and talk. I think it's 10 years of the Victoriana, so that's exciting.
Very
But
cool. Yeah.
brilliant. But for those who might not know, you've been on before, and Andy. But do you want to maybe introduce yourself, and then we'll jump on into the whiskies. I'm just going to type the order of them into the chat so people can kind of get prepared.
Perfect. Yeah, so my name's Andy Jack. I am the global head of whiskey at Loch Lomond Group, which sounds very grandiose, but I kind of look after everything on the sort of marketing, commercial, innovation, development, rather than the production side, which is all Michael Henry, Ashley, and the team there. So yeah, I kind of look after that and the kind of strategy for the brands going forward. And so this is a bit of a treat.
I don't know if it's just me, Andy, but I think we've I can't hear you. Can I
With people, and I quite enjoy it. So thank you all very and take it from there.
So we just had some technical
Have I
difficulties there,
frozen?
Andrew. We lost you, I'm afraid. Test card, says Bob in the chat. Yes. Frank said, "Are you on the International Space Station?" The
A few moments later.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone of you have been listening to our recent episodes of W Club Decanted, do let us know in the chat. The most recent one was with Louise McGuan from JJ Corrie. Some really fascinating conversation, I thought, about the kind of the history of Irish whiskey and how they conceived of their company as a modern whiskey bonder. And can you hear us, Andy? I need to unmute yourself. Sorry.
I'm hoping that's better now.
Perfect. I mean, if we have issues, we could always look at changing the video or something, so if you wanted to just go audio only, but we can hear you anyway. I can hear you now.
That's good. That's good. Yes, I don't know where I got to, but I'll just go back to the beginning. So I look after the whiskies, global head of whiskey. So everything on the kind of marketing, commercial, innovation, brand development, strategy side, rather than the production side. So this is quite a rare treat for me. I don't often get to do tastings, so exciting for me as well. And thank you all for having me. So if you pour an Inchmurrin, the Inchmurrin 12-year-old, I'll just explain very slightly what it is, and then we can all have a drink, and then I'll kind of go back a little bit and explain how we get these whiskies and things. So this is one of the few core releases that from one still only from the straight. I might have frozen again. Can anyone hear me?
You're slightly breaking up. Yeah, I don't know if you maybe wanted to join separately on a mobile device, maybe.
I'll try that. I'll try
And then
that.
we can keep your computer video going and maybe see if the audio is better on the 3G or something.
Okay.
Sorry about this, folks. As anyone who knows on the digital drams, these technical errors aren't normal, and I've some people relating from the waiting room there, which is sorry, we're just having some connection issues here. The Yeah, Andy could try turn off his video. That's a good point as well. But yeah.
Okay, we'll try that. Hopefully that's better. If it's really bad, I can actually go upstairs and cook into a wired connection, but hopefully we'll see how that goes.
Perfect.
Um, okay, so Inchmurrin, made exclusively on our straight neck stills. So we've got a number of different kinds of stills at the distillery, but the straight neck stills are actually unique to us. And most of our whiskies are a combination of different spirits, whereas this one is only one. So it's our straight neck still at a high collection point. It comes off the still at 85% proof. So you get all those kind of lighter, fruitier flavors. Lots of kind of apple on the nose. Maturation for this is in three kinds of American oak. So first fill, refill, and rechar. And those three maturation over 12 years are combined into the final dram. So it's a very kind of elevated and fruity style. On the nose, lots of kind of apple, bits of pear, typically orchard fruit. And then on the palate, you get that sweetness coming through. You get that real kind of bourbon influence. And then kind of like a nice finish as well. You get some kind of floral notes coming through. Yeah, and almost like a kind of fruit tart flavor in there as well. So a really easy, approachable, drinkable dram, 46% non-chill filtered, and just like a really approachable dram. But what I like about it is it's a bit surprising. You know, it's not often you get that kind of floral fruit character quite so pronounced. And that really comes back to the stills. So whilst you're enjoying the dram, I'm just going to explain or try and do a very quick potted history of Loch Lomond. And in order to do that, it's worth going back even further than Loch Lomond to Little Mill. And there was a guy called Duncan Thomas at Little Mill, who's an innovator and an engineer. And he created these straight neck stills with the intention of trying to do a triple distilled style using a double distillation. And so this straight neck still really kind of concentrates the flavors and it only really allows those elevated or fruity or higher notes to come through. And around about 1958, they were looking to expand Little Mill, but because it was surrounded by buildings all around, you couldn't really expand it. So what they did was bought a sister distillery or sister site, which was Loch Lomond. So Loch Lomond opened its doors about sort of mid-60s, and the only stills they had at that point were these straight neck stills. And they're really quite special and quite remarkable, and literally nobody else in Scotch has these stills. And the beauty is that with the ability to concentrate the flavors, that's quite good, so you can get this kind of really fruity style. But we also have stillhead cooling. So you can turn the stillhead cooling on or off and get different cut points on the whiskey, and that will give you different flavors, even with the exact same recipe going in, the exact same mash, you will get different flavors, let alone if you change the kind of peat content in there as well. So over the years, we've developed the distillery, we've added more pairs of straight neck stills, we've added swan neck stills, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And we also have this continuous coffee style still, similar to how Nika make their whiskey. So we have a real kind of, I guess, a really big palette of flavor creation. And, you know, most distilleries will have probably max 3 new make spirits. They'll have a peated, a medium peated, a heavy peated, and an unpeated. I think we're sitting at maybe 12 different new make spirits now. So Michael Henry as a blender has an awful lot to play with. And I guess that is a bit of a two-edged sword because, you know, being able to create many flavors is great, but you still want to be kind of known for something. You want to have that kind of signature style, if you like, so that when people pick up a glass of whiskey and they try it, they can tell that it's a Loch Lomond. And so we talk a lot about fruit, honey, and soft smoke. And the fruit character is probably the most obvious giveaway of a Loch Lomond whiskey, because we kind of gear up a lot of our distillation to do that. And I guess kind of another interesting piece on Loch Lomond is it was never set up to be a brand, if you know what I mean. So in the 60s, it was selling whiskey to other people, and kind of, creating whiskey for blending. And the brand itself is only 10 years 10 years old. So where we've come in 10 years is quite amazing, but all the things that we were doing in the early 60s are really kind of paying dividends now. So the idea was basically, if you pack in as much flavor at the start of the process, then technically you can sell it younger because you get more flavor from it. So, the flavor you get from a 3-year-old when you do long fermentation, use the straight neck stills, is much kind of greater than if it was just a standard distillation. So fast forward to where we are now, we get a big benefit from that. So now that we're aging on for, 10 years, 12 years, or 54 years in the case of our oldest one, you get that incredible kind of flavor development, even at sort of modest ages like 12 years old. So I hope that's kind of coming through on the Inchmurrin. One other thing to add about Inchmurrin, we had a pretty amazing year last year, actually, and we won loads and loads and loads of awards. But the IWSC Inchmurrin 12-year-old best whiskey under 15 years old, which was brilliant in of itself. And that actually allowed us to be asked to enter the Scotch Producer of the Year, which we also won. So Gary and I had quite the night out in London when that all came through. But yeah, it's a really amazing whiskey, and it's lovely to get, or lovely for our whiskey making team to get the recognition for the kind of work they put in to get these things to the kind of quality and consistency that they are. So slange everyone, I'll drink to that myself anyway.
Yeah, no, definitely 100%. And I mean, obviously not this one, but I mean, your Loch Lomond 14 was the W Club Members' Choice Whiskey of the Year last year, and I know the Loch Lomond's always score highly in those two times we've run those awards, so it's really great. It's also got some tremendous feedback in the chat. We've got Kirsty says, wow, a complex balanced dram. Bob says, juicy, mouth-watering freshness, very too easy drinking. Great start. We've also got F&G says, goes really well with sweet and salty popcorn. So it's a good tip. Bob says, love the 14 and the 18. Frank has also said here, Andy, that had the Inishmurren in the past, but don't remember it being this good. Is that just his mind playing tricks on him, or has this, how long has this been out for, and has it developed over the time or changed in any way?
Um, so this one, I probably not so much. There would have been some original, like Inchmurren, because it's a bit complicated, but we name all of our spirit types as well. So one of our distillates is called Inchmurren. So it might well have been like a private bottling or something like that using the Inchmurren name, but wouldn't necessarily have been the kind of core brand bottling necessarily. So yeah, you might well have had something that was different but had an Inchmurren name on it. We've
Yeah.
certainly changed the packaging, that's for sure.
And it's that kind of sweet, floral, fruity kind of flavors. It's almost apt for this time of year as well. I was walking the dog before this tasting, and I could definitely, that as spring is emerging, it's not to sound too cliched and like a whiskey hack, but I could definitely see this being, this would have been a different experience if we were having this tasting in the first week of December. So I think it is. Andy in the chat there, Andy Thorne has said soft mouthfeel with lemony, peppery finish. Ollie says, I've holidayed on Inishmurren, wonderful place. It certainly is. This dram is 54 pounds online, but you'll get 15% off that after the back of this tasting tonight. So a good solid price point for a 12-year-old of this quality, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So there's Inchmurren is an island. It's called the Island of Grass, and so it has quite a lot of kind of fruit floral connotations to it, which is why we use the name for this whiskey. But I think um, one of them is also a nudist colony. I can't remember which island it is. I'm hoping it's not the one that Ollie holidayed on. That'd be a bit of a surprise if you weren't ready for it.
Well, I was always told growing up, never mix your whiskey with your grass. So that's maybe doing that would lead you to end up on the nudist colony. I don't know, but the Ollie says not to my knowledge. Haven't found the spot. Definitely went looking for it though. But it is a beautiful. I mean, not to get like it's almost cliched in terms of people's imagery of Scotland. But it's a really beautiful part of the world. I was actually in Luss doing a hike recently. Like it's absolutely stunning, the kind of setting for Loch Lomond itself. I know you're not exactly based in Luss, your distillery, but it's a tremendous part of the world. So I'd recommend anyone who hasn't get up, visit up, get up there, give it a visit. Um,
Yep. We're actually in the process of building a new distillery at Luss, albeit for the gin rather than for the whiskey. But we will have a little Loch Lomond visitor experience in there as well.
oh, really? That's exciting. And when's that due to open or?
It's due to open sort of, I think the soft launch is June. And yeah, we're in high gear at the moment trying to get it all set up, but it should be quite a nice wee place. And Luss is lovely. Lots of visitors as well. So hopefully it'll be an important Loch Lomond tourist attraction as well.
Um, uh, yeah, brilliant. Kirsty just said in the chat, is that important Irish saying? I'm not sure if that's in reference to what I was saying, but no, I can guarantee you it's not. But
I
yeah,
think
no,
I
this is
comment there about the lemon peppery finish. Um, Citrus is quite an interesting one. So Michael Henry will always tell you that he can pick out citrus in this, usually a sort of lemon and lime character. It's a character in a whiskey that I sometimes struggle with a little bit. I'm usually okay on the kind of orange side of things, but yeah, there's definitely a sort of lemony character in there as well.
no, definitely. And yeah, Bob was asking the chat if it's not on the website. I've linked it in there. I think the hyperlink from the tasting pack itself wasn't going through properly. So Devon has said, is there any plans for a visitor center maybe at the distillery itself? It's in Alexandria, isn't it? Oh no. Can you hear me, Andy?
8:01 p.m.
I'm back. Sorry. Yes, we're in Alexandria.
Marvelous. I got gifted this from the work. Secret Santa. It's a 2025 calendar of puns. So next time your line goes dead, Andy, I've got it prepared to go here. Which might be now. Marvelous. Well,
More moments later.
my dad was a stalker. I want to follow in his footsteps. No, it's not great actually. I once had a job making clown shoes, which was no small feat. No. Um, I don't know why some people hate lazy people. They didn't do anything. Um, my memory's going. I can only remember one Spice Girl, and I can tell you it's scary.
Many unbearable hours later.
Baba said, "Need to lose your connection, Luke." So yeah, lots of don't give
Well,
up day
hopefully this
jobs.
will last a bit better. And I do apologize for this.
No problem. So will we move on to the perfectly balanced? Can you hear me?
Yep, there we go.
Marvelous.
Yeah, all good.
So
So are
we'll
we ready for
we're
another
ready for
dram?
the 12-year-old perfectly balanced. I think
Excellent, excellent.
sounds like a plan.
So this whiskey is probably the best example of our distillery style. And it goes back to that point I was making about the real importance of trying to be known for something. So we talk about fruit, we talk about honey, and we talk about soft smoke. And this one, we call it perfectly balanced for a reason because it has all those elements kind of in a balance, really. So it's about, fruit up front, honey in the middle, and then some soft smoke at the end. So I'll explain a little bit more, but let's get into it first and give it a wee try. So on the nose, lots of apple, but the apple character has changed a little bit for me. So where it was maybe kind of green apples on the first one, this is more kind of red apples. I'm getting more sort of peach and orchard fruits in there as well. So it feels a little bit kind of richer, a little bit more complex rather than the kind of crisp and lemony that you might have got from Inchmurrin. Yeah, definitely like heavy orchard fruit, but a different one from previous. Mm.
It is on the nose. It's completely different. It is like it's almost like a kind of spiced apple, like you get going into autumn. If I was saying the citrusy one was kind of very spring for me, this is given totally different.
Yeah, and it's almost got a sort of slightly more kind of cooked down apple note, if you know what I mean, like slightly stewed. But in the middle, you get this amazing kind of like honey sweetness coming through. And then just at the end of the dram, you get the little bit of peated whiskey kind of coming through. So it's almost like a bit of balance coming through at the end, just that little bit of peated whiskey, just to kind of even up the sweet and the fruit. And yeah, and I guess it's kind of nice as well because we talk about fruit, honey, soft smoke, and you get that almost in that order for this whiskey.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so if Inchmurrin was a single distillate in three kinds of cask, this is actually four different distillates in the three different casks. So what we've got here is high collection point unpeated on the straight neck still, wide collection point unpeated on the straight neck still, high collection point peated, and then we've got some of our unpeated on the swan neck still as well. So all four of those distillates or spirits then go into first fill, refill, and rechar, and then aged for 12 years, then married back together to get this final product. And just as a kind of little snippet or anecdote on this one, I was chatting to Michael about this. And so whenever we're doing a batch of 12-year-old, obviously the goal is for it to be exactly the same batch after batch after batch. And there's always variations in casks, and there's always subtle differences depending on where it's been warehoused or whatever it might be. So to make sure there's consistency, he will try a sample from all 200 casks and then alter the percentages very, very slightly to make sure that that end product is exactly the same as the previous batch, which pretty much blows my mind. Like that's a level of like sensory expertise that I just struggle to get my head around. It's quite incredible.
Mm.
And yeah, to be able to pull fundamentally 12 different cask types or 12 different spirit times cask together to come up with a final thing that tastes identical year after year, batch after batch, I think is unreal. And yeah, and this is again like another whiskey that wins a lot of awards. I think because it is such an approachable style. It's one of those kind of crowd pleasers, and it's a whiskey that I have a bottle open on my sideboard at all times because if I don't know quite what I want to drink, I have this, and then maybe I don't ever leave it actually because it's such a drinkable and approachable style. And I hope you can kind of see that little thread that runs through it from Inchmurrin as well. So this has Inchmurrin distillate in it, but it has obviously these other ones as well, just to give it a slight different variation and to put that balance back into it.
Mm. Jeff has said in the chat there that perfectly balanced is a good name for it. This is a tremendous whiskey. I mean, for me, I think I would prefer this over the first one. Not that the Inishmurren isn't also tremendous, but I've always thought the perfectly balanced was a bit unfair on the other two. The Inishmoan, is it? Which
Yeah.
we've had on a digital drams before. It's not on tonight. And the Inishmurren because it implies that those two are imperfectly balanced, but
Yeah.
it's a really tremendous dram. The Bobbis in the chat does what it says in the bottle, perfectly balanced, mature, ripe fruit, and lovely mouthfeel. Roger said this is more subtle and well-rounded flavor. Fruit is less sharp and more mellow. F&G said, lovely dram. Tried for the first time at the whiskey shop in Leeds when the rep was there just before Christmas. I fell in love straight away and brought a bottle. That's what
There we
reps are
go.
good at. They're making you fall in love with them. Kirsty says, interesting. I got more citrus on the nose with this one, but also toffee apple. It doesn't,
Yeah,
the peat definitely comes through more on the finish than it does up front.
100%, yeah. And to give you a sense of the peat content in it, although we call it perfectly balanced, it's definitely not a third, a third, a third. So we're using 5% roughly of peated whiskey in this. So it's relatively subtle and just kind of you do catch it at the end of the dram just to bring back some of that balance from the sweetness.
Hmm. And I've always found kind of lower levels of peat in any whiskey. That's kind of where it's kind of a marriage or blend of malts or different spirit types. It just elongates that finish that bit more. So even if you're not
Yeah.
a peat lover, it just allows that kind of flavor to hang around at the back. And it really, yeah, it nails it on this one.
Yeah.
It's a really tremendous dram.
Yeah. I think the other thing as well is, it's a very rewarding dram as well. You a lot of the flavors in here are quite easy to pick out, even if you're a relatively novice in the whiskey world. So that kind of like big kind of apple fruit character is quite an easy one to pick out. And I think this is again what makes this like a really interesting whiskey is that there's something for everyone. A whiskey expert can sit there and unpick layer after layer after layer and nuance and subtlety and depth and richness and all that kind of stuff. And then at the other end of the scale, it's just a really easy drinking, nice whiskey that anyone can enjoy. So it's kind of
Yeah.
got a little bit for everyone.
No, definitely, and in that kind of vein, it's got a price point for everybody as well at £42 on our website before the 15% discount. So, I mean, you're getting this for less than 40 quid. I think this is an exceptional bargain. We were actually just saying before the chat started how sort of aged bottle, age statements on bottles automatically seems to mean a greater price hike in whiskey these days. But with the discount, you're getting this at £35 or £35.70. So I think this is an absolute steal. So yeah, definitely one to keep in mind. Would love to hear any more thoughts from all of you guys on the chat in there, or any questions about the kind of distillation of this. You said, sorry, Andy, you said it was how many did you say? 12 different spirits types coming out of Loch Lomond, or 11 was it?
11, I think, is the current number. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's a
So
ferocious amount of different styles to be coming off stills.
it is, yeah, yeah. And it can be a bit of a challenge at times, but where it gets really exciting is, when we do kind of distillery exclusives and kind of weird stuff and, yada, 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 it's just a lovely thing. And, we can kind of play with some of the flavors. We've done some like some Chardonnay wine yeast. We've done like super long fermentations. I think one was a sort of 17-day fermentation. And having all the kit means that you can get a bit weird with it, which is just lovely from a whiskey making perspective. And
Mhm.
it's quite cool. But yeah, I guess the core challenge is making sure that we have a thread that runs through it so that we're recognizable and distinct as a sort of whiskey proposition.
Yeah, and you've touched on this earlier on in the chat, but it's been such an exciting half an hour. So if I'm asking you to repeat yourself, my apologies. The In terms of how those, so obviously you've got your peated styles, you're producing grain, you're producing malt. How does the other 11 styles break down? I know you with between
Yeah.
your still types, is it cup points? Is it mash bills?
So
What's really happening there?
so our I'm going to kind of leave the mash bill bit because we have done some experimental mash bills, but when I talk about the 11 styles, it's one mash bill. So
Right.
we're using essentially three different levels of peating. We've got unpeated, medium peated, and heavily peated. And so when we run, and actually just to kind of flick back a little bit, um, everything that we're doing in the distillery is long fermentation. So, you get all the alcohol you're ever going to get from a fermentation at about 50 hours. So that's when almost all distilleries stop. We do 92 as a minimum. And therefore you get a secondary fermentation. It's called a malolactic fermentation, and it creates kind of fruit flavors in the mash, in the wash. So that's our kind of start point. And whether it's unpeated, medium peated, or heavily peated, that's the process. And so when we put that into the continuous still, we have to call that single grain because it's not a pot still.
Hmm.
So that was the kind of SWA thing. So we're only really doing heavily peated and unpeated in that continuous still. So that's two of them. We've then got the straight neck stills, which have got two different cut points. And so on the two different cut points, you can put in three different levels of peating, so that gives you six. And then you've got the three levels of peating in the straight neck still, which is three. In the swan neck still, which is three, because we can't control the cut point in that one. So we've got three on the swan necks, six on the straight necks, and then two on the continuous. Without wishing to get even more complicated, um, in the continuous still, we can actually control which plates are being used. So we're using the top eight plates pretty much for everything that we're doing. But if we start changing the plates, then we'll get different new make spirit as well. But that's some proper geeky stuff that I leave to Michael kind of thing. But yeah, so essentially, two on the continuous, six on the straight neck, and three on the swan neck. That's our 11.
Yeah, and that is incredible. I mean, it is. I know. I'm repeating kind of what you've said twice already in terms of the challenges for Michael and the team there in terms of what you produce coming out of that. But I mean, I knew guys who worked down in Middleton, and they class themselves as, if you ignore the column still and the grain distillation, they class themselves as having three different styles of whiskey, but they're all just based on cut point. And
Yeah,
the different blends you could try down that distillery, or marriages of that same pot still, that would throw out those three different distillate styles, throwing out with the same mash bill, same stills, just based off cut point, and the variety they would throw out in flavor was phenomenal, and just mouth feel as well, the texture that would change in it.
yeah,
So I mean,
yeah.
the possibilities from what you're describing really are like almost infinite, like, you know.
Yeah, and actually, there's a really cool thing as well, whereby so within peat, you've got three different kinds basically. You've got smoky, spicy, and phenolic, that sort of medicinal style. And you get more medicinal in Isla peat than you do in Highland peat, but you can still actually get all three of them out of Isla peat as you can with Highland peat. So we're using Highland peat for all of our peated whiskey, but you can actually start getting different characters of peat at the different cut points in the different stills. So if we want to do something that's a bit more phenolic and a bit more smoky, we'll take whiskey from certain cut points because we know that's going to emphasize that character in it. So you can even play with the flavors within the kind of family of flavors, as you go through the different cut points. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. I mean, Kirsty says loving the geek, keep it coming, and yeah, no, I agree. This is really fascinating. There's two great questions there from Bob and Ian.
Yeah.
I'm not ignoring them. I'm just conscious. Some people might be dramless. So maybe we
Hmm.
could come on to the 16-year-old Waypoint, which is next, and then we can come to those two excellent questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this one was launched exclusively with the whiskey shop last year, and it's been really really popular amongst a lot of our customers. Some people on this call, especially I can't remember who was in the chat, said they were in Leeds. I know there was a tasting of it in Leeds when it first launched.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really really tremendous dram, and as you were mentioning, Andy, the packaging as well is stunning on this one. If you're looking to gift it or display it on your shelf as well, it's a gorgeous
I'll once I've had a wee dram, I'll go and get the box and show it off actually, because if I didn't do that, the guy that came up with it would probably shoot me since he spent so long getting it all nice. So this is again quite an unusual whiskey for us. And the whole idea with the Waypoint series. So we're going to do a new waypoint every year, roughly, and it'll be slightly different finish, slightly different age, but it's all in that kind of 14 to 17-year-old age bracket. And again, this was an opportunity for us to kind of talk a little bit about Loch Lomond and the area where we're from, which we're very proud of, and then kind of make a metaphor to flavor exploration in the same way. So what we've done is taken a kind of iconic piece of landscape and then built a story around that from a flavor perspective. And this one is called the Falls of Falloch. And this is, believe it or not, the first official bottling that we've ever done that is from our Swan Neck stills only. And we talk a lot about our straight neck stills because nobody else has them. And to a certain extent, the Swan Neck stills maybe get a little bit forgotten about. But what you can do, or what you get from those pot stills, the Swan Neck stills, is body. So you get a kind of thickness and a bit of a mouth feel that you don't really get in the more elevated fruity floral style from the straight neck stills. So when we use some of the Swan Neck style liquid in 12-year-old, for example, that's to give it body and to give it a bit more kind of muscle. And so to have something that is only from that still gives it a very different mouthfeel. Now, what I would say is that although the straight neck stills are the ones that kind of supercharge the fruit, this is still a 96-hour fermentation. So you're still getting a lot of fruit character in the whiskey, but it's probably not quite as prominent as you might get from the straight neck stills. But again, just to kind of take that fruit character and amp it up a little bit, what we've done is finish this for 12 months in cognac casks. And, I think there's different schools of thoughts on finishing casks. We use quite a lot of wine casks generally. And wine is good because it doesn't hide the character and the spirit. Sherry tends to be a little bit too much, and you kind of miss that beauty of the kind of distillate character. And so cognac is a fairly big finish, but because it's a spirit, it imparts much more slowly. So the 12-month finish in the cognac casks it doesn't really dominate the whiskey too much. You can still kind of catch it in there, and it amps up some of that apple character in the whiskey as well. But let's get in and have a wee go at it before I talk the ears off you all.
No, you really do
So,
get that fruitiness on the nose. It's yeah, absolutely
yeah,
brilliant.
and it's feeling again like, if we went from sort of bright crisp on Inchmurrin to slightly more cooked down, this one feels even more cooked down to me. This has got that kind of caramel sweetness in there with the apples, that sort of like molassesy sweetness in there too. And although this is 100% from our Swan Neck stills, it is not completely unpeated. So there are two spirits in there. There's about 10% of heavily peated whiskey in there. So that brings a little bit of spice and a little bit of kind of different angle on it as well.
Mm.
And actually, yeah, on the nose, you can definitely get a little bit of citrus in there as well, a bit of lime.
Yeah, big time. Jeff, it says feels a lot drier than the first two.
Mm.
Greg said more mellow than the first two. Definitely drier. I suppose that's that red wine cask is gonna do that.
The
Which
cognac.
sorry, with the cask finish for this again is
Cognac.
cognac. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
thinking I was jumping ahead in my head to the Chianti cask that we're coming down to.
Yeah. Easily done. Easily done.
Well, I mean, cognac would that give drier? I suppose not necessarily in the same way.
I think
a
it
wine
would
cask
actually. You quite often get that with a spirit. You get a little bit of dryness in there as well. But I think what you do get on this though is a kind of like, you get that sort of waxiness in brandy and cognac. You get that kind of like tongue coating sort of
Yeah.
feel on it. And the sweetness. So if you think about Loch Lomond 12-year-old, you get a lot of kind of honey sweetness in this. This one for me has a bit more of a floral character in there as well. It's more like I don't know if you did it when you were a kid, but when you snap off the honeysuckle flowers and you suck the nectar, you get that sort of floral honey character coming in, like blossom almost.
Sometimes that's all we had for dinner. It's true. Catherine says reminds me of Fisherman's Friends, which I can definitely see. I don't know why, if it's a good thing though, in the sense that I wasn't getting that until I saw that comment, and now it's all I can taste on the finish. But the Bob says cognac finish gives it a nice after dinner vibe. Yeah, totally agree there. No, it's and F&G says gives a peppery aftertaste. We did see Chris McNamee had a bottle on the he lifted up to the screen there while you were talking, Andy, and it is a stunning. I won't ask him to do it again because anyone watching the recording won't be able to see it anyway. But it is a really tremendous box, as you say. Kind of the way it kind of opens out. It's really nice. The Kirsty's also said honeysuckle for supper. Yeah, luxury. That's like the old septic tank. I think we may have lost Andy again, or else he's gone to get the bottle. I'm hoping it's the latter. But yeah, no, it's a really interesting dram. This is also going back on to what kind of we touched on earlier in the call about sort of age statements. I mean, this 16-year-old was retailing at £81, which for a 16-year-old of this quality, cognac cask finished. I know I'm sounding like a used car salesman here, but like I'm not being facetious. It's incredible value for you're paying that for 12-year-olds in some brands these days, and that's obviously before you get your 15% off. So definitely one to bear in mind when I give the discount code at the end. I suppose I know there's a couple of people on these calls sometimes who like to guess what the code's going to be. So we could play that game while we're waiting for Andy to reappear. Andy Thorne says a more complex and mellow, definitely one to savor. 100% agree. Andy, it is absolutely one to savor. I'm not sure I don't know if any of you guys are getting this, but after the kind of the 12-year-old had an incredibly long finish, and the kind of dryness of this is still a really good finish. But I don't know if it's side by side, just on not talking about overall flavor of the dram, but just in the finish, it's maybe hard to compete with, or maybe I just need to cleanse my palate. Andrew.
Oh my God. So right, I'm back.
That's all right, Kirsty. I was just saying that it's an interesting one in terms of flavors of this lineup. The 12-year-old, it's such an elongated finish that it's kind of it's quite a contrast to this one, which is quite a dry, and it's a lovely finish, but it doesn't hang about as much. But then it's a very different experience in terms of mouthfeel and flavor up front. Ollie said they say you shouldn't criticize a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes. I agree. That way, when you criticize him, you're a mile away and you have his shoes. So there you go. That's brilliant. That's good, Ollie. I like that. All the jokes that are popping into my head at the moment are too crass for a recording on this show. So yeah, so you're back anyway, Andy. Did you yeah. I suppose the other thing we were saying just before we lost you, I don't know if you heard me, we were talking about the box on this. I'm just going to stick into the chat the product page link to this so people can have a look at that, because that is gorgeous. I don't know if you had a chance to grab yours. There we go. Brilliant.
Let's see if the internet connection holds out long enough. But yeah, we basically had this amazing artist guy who has reimagined the area around the Falls of Falloch and built in kind of like lots of different stills and flavor notes into this beautiful piece of artwork. So the whole thing kind of folds out. There we go. It's a bit better.
And those are the Falls of Falloch.
They are indeed, yeah. Yeah.
Marvelous.
So yeah, quite a cool gift, and yeah, a nice wee thing.
Definitely. And as I was saying while you were offline, like incredibly good price point for a dram of this age and quality. I don't want to skip over the excellent questions that we got in a little bit earlier from Ian and Just scrolling back there, Ian and Bob. Bob says having
Yeah,
your
so
own on.
there was one about whether we.
Yeah, well, the one we'll go to first was Bob was saying having your own on-site cooperage is also advantageous. So you can vary the toasting of casks to suit Michael's requirements. Lucky to visit last year with Gary and see it in action. Is that something you can maybe tell us a bit about, Andy?
It is, yeah. So the cooperage is amazing, and we're one of only 4 distilleries that has an on-site cooperage. And to be brutally honest, the kind of inception for that, or the reason for having that, is to be able to control quality. Fundamentally, we can get more life out of our casks by looking after them, by managing them, than most other people can. So there's a nice sort of sustainability piece and quality and consistency and all that good stuff that you want. But I think to Bob's point, what's been amazing over the last few years actually is what the innovation possibilities have been from doing that. So we've started doing a couple of different releases, one for Glen Scotia and one for Loch Lomond, using heavily charred casks. So we char them for about twice as long. And basically, when you're charring a cask, what you're doing is caramelizing the sugars and the vanillins in the wood. And then when the whiskey goes into it, it'll breathe a bit more deeply into the wood, a bit more frequently because of the char level, and extract all that sweetness. So you end up with this kind of like real like Demerara sugar caramelization coming through in the whiskey. And we do that in Glen Scotia Victoriana, which is a key part of it actually, and Loch Lomond Steam and Fire. So it's been quite amazing. And when we've been working with some of these very difficult to work with casks, having the cooperage has been a godsend. When you look at Mizunara, so Mizunara, obviously very rare. It's a 200-year growth to get to full maturity. It's a limited harvest, and it's soft as hell. So it's about, compared to American oak or European oak, it's incredibly soft. So the staves have to be thicker, they have to be bound tighter, managed better, and you wouldn't use them, to be honest, unless the whiskey was as good as it is coming out of them. And having our cooperage means that we're actually able to use these with a really good level of success, and also rechar them, refill them, all that good stuff that goes with it. So it's been a very important piece of our kind of like innovation armory, if you like. And and I know we're here to talk about Loch Lomond, but when you look at Victoriana, which is probably one of the most awarded whiskies in the world, an outstanding non-age statement whiskey, and the success of that is down to having that innovation control in the cooperage. So yeah, it's super important for us.
Yeah, marvelous. No, that's interesting that you use the Mizunara as an example because it is a fascinating, has its own kind of fascinating history, and I might be apocryphal here, but I don't, I think it grows less straight than other oaks, so you get less efficient yield off of the tree when you harvest it compared to others.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's an interesting example as to some of the things you can do that maybe other distilleries would have at least a higher expense in terms of getting in a third party to manage that kind of stuff. Ian has said, Andrew, do you mix the single grain from the continuous still with whiskey of any of the malts and sell them just as blends? Is there? I suppose it goes back. This was back the time we were talking about the different cuts. I suppose I suppose the point I was making about the infinite possibilities in terms of sort of possible outcomes, like yeah. So just in terms of the kind of
Yeah.
your blended whiskey output and how you match them with other malts. So correct me if I'm wrong in terms of your question there, Ian.
Yeah. So uh, I'm going to answer that in a little bit of a roundabout way, because the straightforward answer is yes, we have done that once for a special release. So we mixed single grain whiskey from the continuous still, which was 100% malted barley, and we mixed it with single malt, and we created a 5-year-old, fully heavily peated, fully 100% malted barley blend, which we think is probably the only one that's ever been done.
Wow.
So that was cool. And we did that as a distillery exclusive. and it was an absolute mind blower. It was probably one of my favorite whiskies that we did. I think we did it in 2023, and it was absolutely beautiful. But we only did 400 bottles of it. To skip back to the other kind of point on it, so when we first started making whiskey out of that continuous still, the SWA regulations didn't make a distinction between pot stills and continuous stills. So we actually released it first and foremost as a single malt whiskey. And as soon as we did that, the SWA popped round to have a wee look and a chat with us and basically said, you can't do that. And we sort of said, well, why not? And they said, because we're about to change the rules to make sure you can't. So to all intents and purposes, it is a single malt. It just happens to be in a different style of still. But actually, I do think they did us a favor there because the spirit that we get from the continuous still is really quite different. It's very floral, very kind of elegant, even higher cut point actually than our straight neck stills. So I think if we had been selling that as single malt, it would probably be confusing for people because it's just too different to our actual single malt.
Yeah.
And at our distillery, so we make a distinction between grain and malts. And so within malts, we do roughly 5 million litres a year, but that includes the single grain that uses 100% malted barley. And then we have a separate grain distillery, which is a kind of classic grain for blending, and that's about 20 million litres. So technically, we're doing grain in two different ways. One, which is the stuff that you would use for blending, and then the stuff that we use as single grain whiskey, 100% malted barley. So we have a sort of three different elements to it. But to be fair, we don't talk a lot about our grain non-malted barley business because we do some through High Commissioner, but a lot of it is for selling on to other people. So it's not a big part of our business. That our focus is very much on the malts.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying there about the definition of calling it a single malt coming off the continuous still, but um, it's come up a few times on these digital drams and other things. We did an event with Inchterny Distillery a while back, and um, they distill their inaugural release as a rye in terms of its mash bill makeup, in terms of the it's used on a as far as I can remember. Someone on this call might be able to correct me. It's distilled in a pot still, but they have to call it a single grain because the mash bill isn't a malt mash bill. And I'm a fan of
Yeah.
I'm not poo-pooing the regulations because I think it's helped protect and keep a consistent identity for Scottish whiskey. So the regulations have been important, but I think there maybe is room for some flex there in terms of not saying allowing these things to be called maybe single malt or whatever, but to be able to say, well, this is a rye type whiskey. It's distilled in a pot still. It's clearly not a single grain. Maybe there should be broader categories within that single grain kind of category that allow you to kind of say, signal to customers that this isn't just your typical comes off the sill at 96% ABV and is as neutral flavor as we can have it, which is what people think about when they think about single grain. Versus we've thought about this, the mash bill's different, the distillation type's different, things are different here, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair challenge. Yeah, I mean, so our Loch Lomond single grain is in the same category as Spearhead, as has been mentioned in the chat, and Rylaw. And they're poles apart in terms of what they are. So, one is simply single grain because of the still, and then the other is single grain because it doesn't use malted barley. So they're very different. And it feels like a false categorization to do that, actually. But yeah, I think I'm in agreement that the rules are good from a protectionism around single malt. I think we're living in a slightly weird space with our single grain. That's the issue. And, I was chatting to some American colleagues, so they've now got their American single malt categorization. And I was kind of laughing with them because if we were distilling our single grain in America, it would be single malt. So it doesn't quite have the consistency that you would hope it would have. And again, like, Nika, that's they're making whiskey exactly the same way that we're doing for the single grain,
You're saying
and
for their
they've
coffee
got that
malt.
single malt. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Well, I mean, maybe
Yeah,
that's the way to get around it in the sense that I'm not sure. I'm not sure actually officially what theirs categorized as when we sell it here, but it's because it's called coffee malt. I suppose that's what they've got around it by what they've actually named the release, which is maybe to an extent. I know the Rylaw example. Rylaw is actually genuine the name of the field behind the distillery. I've been there, but it also coincidentally has rye in the name. So you kind of you've kind of slightly skirted around there. The mention of Spearhead is an interesting one because that's actually one. The It was gold medalist in our blended category for the W Club Awards this year, and it scored really highly amongst our members. And it's a tremendously affordable blend. I think it's kind of underrated in terms of kind of maybe I don't want to say cheap, but cheaper price point compared to what we tend to discuss on these tastings. It's a great
yeah,
dram.
yeah, yeah. And that's all 100% malted barley through the continuous still. But then I guess the thing that differentiates Spearhead is that infrared toasting and how the casks are then managed. But yeah, like 100% malted barley, very drinkable dram.
Yeah, marvelous. Brilliant. So we'll come on to the special edition Chianti wine cask finish now.
Yep.
I see there's a question popped in there from F&G. I won't skip that. We will come on to that, but we'll just maybe talk a bit about this dram first, and then we can come back to that F&G if
Yeah,
you don't mind.
absolutely. Not only having technical challenges, but I'm struggling to get the lid open on this one.
This was some feedback we've gotten in the past on these tastings. I see Roger's got his pliers there, and I saw Jamie earlier on with a knife. So I'll talk again to our bottling hall folks and see if we can have another word with them, because it was something
Well,
that was raised before and I did
but
discuss it with them. So apologies for people who are struggling to get these open. I don't know if people noticed earlier on, but for the 16-year-old, I actually had to grip it on the teeth. So yeah, sorry about that, folks. That's
definitely better too tight than too loose.
Steph said we can saber it. I would like to see that. I know during COVID or coming out of COVID, it was this, there was this trend online where people were sabering their
Sabrage.
champagne with or yeah with all the various different household objects, so we could see how we can get over the sobrier or whatever. Yeah, showed myself up there for my inability to say that word out loud, but anyway.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, the next two whiskies are golf editions, and so we are now sort of midway through our second 5-year contract of sponsoring the Open, and it's been a really wonderful thing for us actually, and it probably accelerated our brand quite significantly. And so yeah, it's been quite good for us, and we do these limited editions every year, and we do kind of two levels of it. So we have a sort of a non-age statement level and an age statement level, and typically we'll do something a little bit different. Try and use an interesting finish, something to create interest with maybe people that haven't found our brand yet, and they see it on a shelf in Taiwan or Singapore or around the world, and it has that open mark and then something interesting from a whiskey perspective. And we use quite a lot of wine finishes, particularly on the younger whiskies. And I kind of mentioned that before. The Loch Lomond spirit style lends itself very nicely to wine finishes. And Oloroso would probably overpower a whiskey like this because all of that character that's in the new make spirit would kind of get masked by the finish. And so we tend to use wine casks, and they're very good at kind of elevating rather than masking the character of the whiskey. So a little bit about technically what this is. So there's a few different ages of whiskey in this. I think the oldest whiskey is about 9 years old, and that's about 70% of it. It's all Inchmurrin, and sorry, it's all from our straight neck still, but it's not all Inchmurrin. So the vast majority is Inchmurrin, and that is that high cut point unpeated. And then that's about sort of 60-70% of the makeup of this. And then you have about 25% of the wide cut point on the straight neck still, and then just about 5% of peated at the wide cut point as well. So all on the straight neck still, so very fruity, quite light, quite elevated, and then it's got that Chianti cask finish as well. Now, there'll no doubt be people on this call that know more about wine than I do, so I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to get into what Chianti is all about. But from what I do understand of it, it's got quite bright acidity, lots of kind of good fruit notes in there. It's not too heavy of a wine. And so elements of that will to get those kind of like sort of lighter sort of cherry notes in there as well. And so on the nose, for me, I get some of that kind of tartar fruit, maybe a little bit sort of red cherry, red currant, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Again, lots of fruit character, but again, different from the Inchmurren, for example. I'm not getting the kind of appley stuff that I was getting on the Inchmurren. Definitely more fruity.
Yeah. Greg has said in there, like, I get red fruit. Bob said, like red wines. Well, like red wine finishes, and this one doesn't disappoint.
Yeah. And I think as well, and you do get this with, or I certainly find this with Loch Lomond and red wines, you get a little bit of tannic dryness from the wine cask. So just at the end, you get that little wee suck in on the cheek, which is quite nice on the finish.
Yeah.
That fruit gives way a little bit to just a bit of kind of, oh yeah, a little bit of spice, a little bit of difference on the end.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. And Ian has said strawberry on the palate, which is interesting because this actually reminds me of a strawberry wine that I used to stock in a bar I ran a long time ago. In terms of like, yeah, the straw, even though it was, you kind of maybe not what people associate with strawberry, but it is, the wine itself, how it came out was quite dry. It had quite savory notes. So yeah, it's really interesting. Steph had said some savory notes there in the chat. Effigy says surprised about the Inchmurren content because I feel like it tastes more like the 12-year-old perfectly balanced. And
Yeah,
Nick has
so
said,
I think that's actually bang on. And the reason for that is because Inchmurren is completely unpeated, whereas the perfectly balanced has probably about the same proportion of peated whiskey in it, that sort of 5%. So definitely at the end there, you get a little bit of that peated, which you definitely wouldn't get on the Inchmurren. So that's a great comment.
hmm. Nick has said red currant crumble for me. Chris Francis, now
Yeah.
this is nice, getting cherries, but with a hint of honey. And Chris has said, I'm a major Inchmurren fan. This is lovely. Um,
Mm.
yeah, no,
I
it
think
is.
it's nice because it just gives it a wee twist. And you still have the kind of greatest hits in there. You've got the fruit, the honey from the the original bourbon maturation, and then just that little twist on it from the Chianti cask just makes it feel a little bit different and a little bit more unusual.
Hmm. No, definitely. I just want to reiterate, I know I said this in the start of the call, and then we had some technical difficulties and people joined a bit late, but we are one of the first people in terms of the general public to try these in the world. These aren't out yet. You can order them pre-order on this from this tasting off the back of this tasting, but they're now officially till the 8th of April. So yeah, this is a kind of a kind of exciting to kind of get a glimpse behind the curtain for this. Greg said, did I miss the cost of the Waypoint 16? Apologies. I thought I did say it. It's £81 before the discount. So obviously you'll get 15% off that at the end of this tasting. Which I think for a 16-year-old of that quality is really good. This one, I believe, I'm going to double check this, but I believe this is actually only £47. The
Yep.
Chianti wine cask edition. So, I mean, this is a great price for this kind of dram. Catherine says Haribo giant strawberries. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Another great
No,
taste. No, it's twice Catherine's jumped in with some good taste. And I think she'd said uh, Fisherman's Friends earlier on, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, brilliant.
you definitely, when you finish the glass and there's still just a little drip in the end, I definitely get more strawberry off the back of that once the glass is empty.
Can I part of what I have to do here with these being recorded and kept on the internet for eternity, Andy, is expose my ignorance, right? And I'm going to do that here again, as I just have earlier on in this call. The Chianti cask finishes, right? So I've been to a fair few vineyards in my life, and the whole point of when they're aging these red wines, if I'm not mistaken, is about using casks that don't impart too much flavor into the wine. That they're kind of yeah, kind of tired, kind of casks that don't give much back, so that the kind of the wine doesn't become over oaked, for there's kind of obvious reasons there, and I'm no sommelier, so I won't go into them. But the in terms of how then you're, maybe this is in line with the coopering question from early on. In terms of then how that then when you get these red wine casks, how the whiskey kind of interacts with the wood and draws back out the wine. If these are kind of explicitly meant to be tired old casks, is there a re-toasting there, or a re-charring? What's that? How does that work?
So when you retoast and rechar a cask, you're basically bringing it back to virgin.
Hmm.
So that's almost like your kind of third use. So these are first fill Chianti casks. So it's the first time it's been used once the wine has gone from it. And the flavoring part is basically, so every cask is charred. If you don't have a char, there's no interaction between the wood and the liquid. And so when the wine has been in it, even if it's for a relatively short amount of time, that wine will get soaked into the wood. And bear in mind, that is also interacting with the vanillins, with the sugars that are in the wood, but it'll stay in the wood. So when you then refill it with the whiskey, as the whiskey breathes into the wood, it'll just start drawing elements from that. So it's a relatively subtle process. And and if you think about a wine versus a spirit, if you're doing something like a rum finish or something like that, um, the whiskey has to work much harder to that flavor out because it's more subtle, much longer finishes. But actually, when it comes to wine casks, 9 months or something like that is usually plenty, even 6 months sometimes. So it's really just about the residuals that are in the cask, and then the whiskey will breathe in and start drawing that through and bringing that into the flavor of the whiskey.
And
And
when you
and
say usually,
interestingly, I was at a Glen Scotia event last night.
sorry, go no, go
Carry
on, no,
on.
no.
Sorry.
I think there's a slight delay, but you finish your
I
Glen
was just
Scotia
going to
point,
say that
Andy.
yeah.
But
The interesting thing in that was that the I can't remember what I was going to say now. That's terrible.
you were at a Glen Scotia event. Put yourself back in that moment.
Yeah, and sorry, that was the point that um if you were to drink a Chianti and then try and pick out the kind of key flavors from a Chianti and see them in the whiskey, there's not necessarily a direct line. So just because a wine is big, bold, and full of like plummy, jammy notes, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to translate into the whiskey. So there is a bit of experimentation. You don't know exactly what characteristics are going to be pulled through into the whiskey based on what the wine tastes like. Sometimes it happens, but not always.
Hmm. No, that makes perfect sense. And just to clarify there, the length of the finish on this one in terms of, do you say 9 months, was it?
Sorry, it can be less or more. This one is actually 5 months
Five
only.
months. Okay.
Yeah.
Marvelous. No, that's excellent. And David says, going back to the Inchmurn now, I'm going to pick. I now sorry, going back to the Inchmurn, I now pick up custard notes and sweet pastries. Krista says, how can we pre-order this one? So on the product page for the digital drams pack, the 5 drams, the you can link to them there now as of this afternoon, and you just check out with them as if you're buying them normally. There's nothing different you have to do, but just note that they won't be dispatched until the 8th of April. The other thing worth noting, folks, is if you're ordering these with some of the other drams on here tonight, I'll have to clarify this. I'll do this before our email. I email out the discount code and the video tomorrow as a reminder. Normally we don't dispatch all of the products until they're all there. So hypothetically, if you ordered this with another bottle, you might not get them all together. Now I'll clarify that by tomorrow. Obviously you're all W Club members, so you get free shipping. So if you're worried about that, because I don't have a great answer for that right now, just buy them, check out separately with them, and then they'll be two separate orders, and it won't be a problem. But just bear in mind, if you order this with maybe the 12-year-old perfectly balanced, and which is in stock and can dispatch to you, just bear in mind you might not get the bottle that we do have until this one's available. So just wanted to clarify that in case anyone had any issues. Catherine says, I'm also getting those pink wafer biscuits, which is another fantastic tasting notes.
So it
And
also
definitely
makes me want
custard
to
as
eat
well.
pink wafer biscuits now as well.
Pardon?
It also makes me want to eat pink wafer biscuits now as well.
Yes, no, I 100% definitely agree. So we come on to the star of the, I don't know why I said star of the show, but it's the oldest and most expensive dram on here. So I suppose in that way it's the star of the show. The 2020, sorry, 22-year-olds 2025 edition open course. What's the difference? I mean, obviously it's just that you're kind of naming nomenclature for these special editions, but you've got the special edition 2025 Chianti wine cast finish, and then you've got open course. What does open course mean?
So we have, it's basically our way of making a distinction, but keeping it in the realms of golf. So every year we have an open special edition, which is non-aged, and the open course collection, which is the kind of the higher end, the older one. And I think it of it, but I think with these whiskies, you get massive bang for your buck, and I'm obviously that because it's expensive. Insight into this one. So this is 22 years old, because in it is 22 years old. However, there's quite a lot of this whiskey is actually quite a bit older than that. So there's whiskey in this which is from 1996. So it's sort of 28, 29 years old, and a reasonable proportion of it as well. And so there's a combination of different ages within this. Most of it from high collection strength unpeated. There is about 20% of it which is heavy peated. Now, that sounds like quite a lot, but bear in mind, as a cask ages, all the edges will come off it. So 20% at 50 ppm, you're not going to get like a really heavy hit of peat. That will be rounded down by the sort of 25 odd years in the cask on that one. And actually, some of that peated liquid is actually 1994. So that's literally 30 years old. So all of those we've kind of vatted together. We've got a small amount of straight neck low collection strength in there as well. All of that has been vatted together and then put into new Spanish hogsheads. So that is not, it hasn't had sherry or anything in it before. It's basically a new cask which has been charred, and then it's been 12 months in that, I think it is. I need to check my notes on that. But what you've got here is like a crazy rich mix, basically. You've got the interplay of some of the straight neck stills with the peated whiskey, and then you've got that kind of overlay of spice that you'll get from a new cask. So on the nose, I'm getting some of that spicy stuff in there already. Definitely some toasted oak. Fruit character, I think for me again is probably, I would say probably like sweet spice apple, maybe a bit of ginger in there as well. But definitely a more complex nose than anything else that we've had on the mix yet.
Mm. No, definitely. Wow, that spice is whew.
Yeah, yeah. No,
No,
it's
it's
nice
it's it's incredible.
and it gives it length and complexity and richness. I'm definitely getting a bit of sweet spice in there as well. On the nose, it's probably a bit more kind of peppery, but I've got maybe some cinnamon, maybe a little cardamom as well, actually.
Definitely cardamom. I had
Mm.
a friend of mine years and years ago who used to take bottles of cheap whiskey like Jameson or Powers or whatever on hikes, and he'd put some cardamom pods in just the night before, not like well in advance. And by the time you got to the top of that mountain, you're going on the hike. He had this hip flask where the cardamom had just it's perfectly infused, like 12, 20 hours later, to give this lovely balance and spice. It was gorgeous. And I started using it in cocktails. I would cardamom infuse some whiskey, cardamom and ginger, infuse it in some whiskey, and then
Yeah.
use it in an old fashioned or something. And so shout out to them if they're ever watching this. But this is like it's like elements of that captured and then expanded, and it's incredible actually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
the
it's
balance of
like
flavor in there is
I,
amazing.
I finished sipping about 2 minutes ago and I've still got it.
Yeah.
Super long. Absolutely beautiful length on it.
No, no, definitely. Greg says I've enjoyed the Loch Lomond stand whilst attending the last few Open Championships. I was also at the 1996 Open. It's fair play, Greg.
Oh,
Where
nice.
was the 1996 Open? If you want to remind us, maybe you know Andy off the top of your head. But Greg, please do let
Yeah.
us know where that was.
Uh,
After dinner malt time, says Frank. I definitely agree. Actually, the longer the finish goes on, it starts developing as that spice part passes. It starts developing a kind of mintiness, or at least that kind of minty after flavor.
yeah.
So yeah, after dinner malt time, you're dead right, Frank. It's almost like an after eight on the finish, and there is layers of chocolate in there as well. It's a special dram, Andy, I must say.
Yeah, yeah. I just love that. And I think with the kind of older stuff, there's so much at play. There's so much to kind of peel back. And I'm just guessing on this one because I haven't tried it, but I suspect if you leave it sitting for an hour and come back, it'll change again.
Yeah, fat chance I'll leave it sitting for an hour, but I imagine. Um,
That's true.
but no, it is quite good. But you would want to, I suppose, the only caveat I would say to that is you would want to be into the kind of spicy whiskey, which maybe you go back to our discussion earlier on about perfectly balanced. Like it's a million miles away from where we started on the Inchmern in that regard in terms of that flavor profile. So yeah, you'd want that to be your kind of preferred whiskey style, but it's great in that way. Spanish oak. Tell us about the kind of sourcing of that or how that works.
So essentially, we're getting oak casks that are kind of we're buying them before they get into the sherry industry, more or less, or into the wine industry in Spain. And so every kind of genus of oak from each area is subtly different, kind of biologically, but also in terms of the properties it has. And so we've trialed quite a lot of different European oaks. So we've done some Swedish oak, we've done some French oak, obviously, and we're kind of looking at some other interesting places, but each one is subtly different. But because it's a new cask, you're not getting any other category or liquid influence on it. So it just really becomes about the spice and the sweetness. And that's kind of what you're getting here. I think that's where you get a lot of that kind of spice coming through because that new oak will just pep it up and charge that kind of spice palette on it. And yeah, and as I say, like each sort of genus or categorization will be subtly different and it all plays a slightly different role from a flavor perspective. And to go back to I know it's not European, but to go back to the Mizunara, if you try Mizunara, it's very kind of like aromatic sandalwood, sweet notes, fragrant. It's almost like potpourri, the kind of influence you get, which is very different from what you get from a kind of American or European virgin cask. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, and in a way, it's a bit of a truer read on the character of the wood because you don't have a spirit or a wine or a sherry to worry about in the mix.
Mm. Yeah, no, no, certainly. It's interesting. I love that kind of use of Spanish oak, European oak, in terms of a nod to maybe a past when that would have been a lot more common. Because obviously, yeah, just in terms of the history of casks. Like, as far as I understand it, the the 19 even going back even before the 19th century, most actual sherry in terms of Solera was actually aged in American oak. but
Yeah,
sherry, but European oak was used as the transportation casks to bring it to Scotland, or to bring it to anywhere in the UK or Ireland where it was, the sherry was decanted and sold back when people in the UK and Ireland used to drink sherry. And then the casks would be reused. So they were using these
absolutely right.
transportation vessels that was European oak that was barely touched with sherry, maybe for 6 months at best, and then used in whiskey production. And the way the industry has sort of become a simulacra of itself, we've lost that, until you get kind of hints of it from releases like this. But obviously, you said this was unseasoned, but it still will give you maybe a bit more of a glimpse into what those would have been like flavor wise.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Nathan has said a hint of cut grass on the nose. As it maybe the whiskey's taken a lawnmower to Inishmeren, if it's the grassy isle. Quickly turns to a slight smoky chai. Takes a second to get used to the tannins dash slash spice on the palate, but super big finish. David says, love the funk on the nose. Makes this super complex a very thinking whiskey. Simulacra, great word. Thanks, Ollie. Appreciate that. And this is on my
So,
fifth whiskey, and
so,
I can come out with that, huh?
so I was actually just checking, but the comment on funk slash cut grass, so about 70% of this has been aged in refill
Mm.
before going into the finishing cask. And refill actually works much better for older whiskies. It's a bit more well behaved. So if you're aging stuff on, then refill is where you want. But refill does give you a little bit of the kind of funky cut grass note sometimes. So I think it's probably that cask that's kind of pulling that through into the finished whiskey.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's really interesting, and it's better than what I would have said, which was funk was aged in a James Brown cask or something. No, that's brilliant. And the we got an answer actually from in terms of where the Open was on in 1996, Lytham, which I think is in Lancashire. I probably mispronounced that. I find Anglo-Saxon place names very hard to pronounce. But yeah, very good. I'm sure it's a gorgeous golf course. Catherine says smells a bit like rhubarb and custard sweeties, but with the fizzy sugar coating of pineapple or cola cubes to taste, which is another excellent tasting note. This is £250, I believe, or at retail, and you'll be getting 15% off. Seeing as this is our last dram, I'll give you the code now. I know there was a few guesses at it earlier on, but that were quite humorous. But it's WS25LL, so it's not that complicated or glamorous. But that's the discount code that we get you 15% off all the drams we've tried tonight. So I think this is an exceptional dram. Obviously, more expensive out of the lot, but definitely worth it. I think if you have it to spare, because you're getting all those W Club premium points. That means you can get discounts on your future whiskey purchases, and it's an incredible dram, and you're saving a chunk of cash at 15%. Andy, do you know what 15% of 250 is?
Um, that would be uh, 32.50.
I well, let's I yeah, 37.50. But you've done yeah,
37.50,
it's
sorry,
good.
yeah.
I was only joking when I asked you. I didn't think you'd actually give me a serious response. It's brilliant. Um, £20 worth of points there. Luke says Nick 100%. So this would net you 848 points after discount. So you're not getting, with the discount, you're not getting the full 20 quid, but 1,000 points is £20 off your next purchase, which is nearly half a bottle of the 12-year-old perfectly balanced. So
There you go.
everyone's winning here. F&G says, Andy, what is your position on the idea to allow English whiskey makers to use the term single malt?
So, I think that's absolutely fine. And actually, I think for me, and I'm gonna kind of answer this question in a slightly roundabout way. But I was over in the States visiting a distillery they're doing multiple different spirits, but they're also doing American single malt. And I walked into their still room, and the stills were exactly like Glenfarclas. Like they were carbon copies of Glenfarclas stills. and they have a rick house which is digitally linked to a weather station in Speyside, and it mimics the atmospheric conditions of Speyside when they're maturing their American single malt. Now, that is clever, no question, and a technological marvel. But I was left there thinking, I want to know what your take on American single malt is. Not are you able to copy Glenfarclas? Because I don't see the point in that. I want to know who they are as a whiskey maker, and that's what's really exciting. And so to answer the question about, should English whiskey makers use single malt? Absolutely. But I want to know who you are as a distillery. What is it that you're doing that's cool, that's different, that's interesting, that makes you add to the category and bring people in? So yeah, it's less about the terminology for me, more just like, you know, I want to know who they are as a whiskey maker and what their kind of niche or what their speciality is. Because that's the beauty of the industry that we work in. It's coming up with stuff that's fascinating, interesting, different, weird, exciting, and I think actually in a strange way, Scotch single malt or single malt Scotch has been pretty good at it. We have regionality, we have folk like Nick Neen doing amazing things and sustainability, and I just kind of love all that. I think it's great. So for me, single malt, that's great, but I just want to know who the distillery is and why it's cool. That's for me the big thing.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And Dom's also kind of contributed excellently to that as well in the chat, where he says single malt Scotch whiskey is a specific product. So yeah, I mean single malt literally just means made with malted barley, I suppose, from a single distillery. It doesn't even just mean that, because you could just have a malt
Yeah,
whiskey. So yeah, these are it just goes back to our conversation about the single grains, and that it's a balance between having a descriptive term that sort of gives you an indication of what's going to be in the cask, or a category term, or in the bottle rather than the cask. But it's two different things, and it's a hard balance to strike, but it is important to strike it. And there's a reason we got to this point in terms of regulations around aging and sort of minimum age statements and labels on it, and it's mostly down to the Scottish being cowboys, in terms of and I say that facetiously, but also seriously, in the sense that the first people to petition government to regulate whiskey were doing so in a reaction to blended whiskies coming into the market and calling themselves whiskey, and people were saying, well, these blends can't be whiskies. The ergo whiskey needs to be X, Y, and Z.
yeah,
And so it's an ever involving conversation with the past, present, and future, and with how we make it today. But I totally agree with you, Andy, in terms of what's a North American take on malt whiskey. You should be putting your own spin on it, but any distillery should be doing that. I think you've got limited ceiling. I mean, maybe locally you have a good, kind of ability to hit a local market, especially in the current age of tariffs and everything. But really, in terms of building a brand, you need to have an identity, rather than just
yeah,
being a clone of another distillery.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Catherine has said that I like to add a wee splash of water to see what the difference is, but a dash of water doesn't do any of these any favors. They are fantastic as they are. It's actually maybe the one thing we missed out in the tasting tonight, which often comes up when we talk about your brands, is that they're all around 46%. There's 46, there's 46.2, there's 46.7. Could you maybe kind of talk a bit about that, Andy?
Yeah, so all of our kind of proper whiskies, if you like, stuff that the kind of specialist whiskey shops sell, they're all 46%. And the reason for that is that's the point at which you don't have to chill filter. So anything that's 46% and above, you don't have to chill filter. And it may be a slightly moot point, because some will tell you that chill filtering strips a bit of body and kicks back some flavors, and some will tell you it doesn't make a difference. Um, Personally, I kind of feel like the alcohol plays a component part in the experience of the whiskey. And I feel like 40% for me doesn't really do the job. And I kind of feel like it needs that extra alcohol to kind of hold the flavors, to let you pick it apart and all that kind of good stuff. So I find that there's a sort of functional benefit other than the chill filtering piece. Uh, but that may be just a personal take on it. And I'll come back to the water piece in a minute, but I always think it's interesting when you look at ABV and again, like last night, I was tasting pretty much everything I was tasting was cask strength or high ABV, sort of north of 55. And for most of the whiskies, the the alcohol isn't the story. And I think if somebody has put together a whiskey, the ABV is almost irrelevant as long as it doesn't interfere with your enjoyment of the drink. And I kind of feel like, if you're drinking a whiskey which is 48% and you can taste the alcohol and it's off-putting, then something's off in the balance. And similarly, if it's 59%, being being high ABV for the sake of it is pointless if it's interfering with your enjoyment of the drink. And I kind of feel the same a little bit about water. And some whiskies will react to a few dashes of water and some won't. And, the theory is that a few drops breaks up some of the longer chain molecules, breaks up some of those polymers, and it can release different flavors or intensify some of the ones that are already there. Um, I don't know. I find less and less that I add water to anything. I'll usually drink it neat first at any rate. I'll try it with a little bit of water towards the end of the dram, but yeah, I mean, I tend not to get that much of a difference on some of them, particularly when you have whiskies that are already packed full of flavor. If you take an Inchmurrin, for example, it's got such dominant fruit characteristics that a few drops of water are unlikely to give you more because there's already packed full of flavor in there. So yeah, I think it's fair. It's always good to try it, see what happens. But certainly on the kind of Loch Lomond side of things, I don't often find that they add an awful lot to it.
Yeah, I think it's as you say, it's always good to try it if you have the enough liquid to do so with it. And I think the more you drink whiskey, the more you sort of taste something and you know instinctively this will open up with a few drops of water. But obviously getting to that point where you know that involves A, drinking a lot of whiskey, and B, actually adding water to it and failing sometimes knowing that you've screwed your dram because you've added too
Yeah.
much water. So, however you're drinking your whiskey, folks, once you're drinking whiskey and you're engaging with it, which obviously you all are because you're on this call, you're doing the right thing. So, there's no point in getting too precious about it. But yeah, that's really good advice, Andy, from what you've kind of laid out there. So now this is normally the point of the night. We will, if anyone's got any kind of last minute questions for Andy, do get them in the chat. We'd love to hear your favorite drams of the night. Give us an indication of what you preferred in there. I can see a couple of comments coming in there. And also, if you want to add it with that, see who's going to tell us who's going to win the British Open. Andy, have you any favorites you've backed? I suppose I know we're a few months away now, but anyone you're fancying at the moment?
Um, I'm not sure. It's always hard to tell with golf, but if McIlroy comes into his game, you know, it being in Portrush, it would be a lovely story. It would be a lovely story. So it'd be good to see him do well, or at least be in the mix to contend for it on the last day.
Yeah. I think that's true, and we should love him as whiskey drinkers because he is a chief bottler.
Yeah.
But but the interestingly, in the chat, the Chianti Open edition seems to be an early leader in terms of our competition here. Although a few people now are saying the 22-year-old, but it's quite tight in there. Got a few other comments there. It says Dom says, I'm really conflicted tonight as I'm a huge Glen Scotia fan, but there's a certain Loch Lomond special edition that's made its way into my basket. And let's do a Glen Scotia night. I'm definitely up for a Glen Scotia night. We've done a couple of Glen Scotias in the past, and I want to do them again. The challenge with some of these digital drams is trying to just keep them a bit fresh over over kind of an 18, 24 month period, because we could just do Loch Lomond, Glen Scotia on rotation every second week, Andy. But yeah.
Yeah.
But that's good to know, Dom, that you'll be up for another Glen Scotia one. Catherine says, I like to, oh, well, we got the we drop of water. We've got Can't They Finish My Favorite, great price too. Many thanks to Andrew for the many facts and insights into Loch Lomond. Really enjoyed the tasting. And we got a few similar comments like that earlier on, people who dropped off the call. I think it's quite tight here between, I think maybe the from what I can see quickly, Andy, the 22-year-old is in the lead, but the both open editions are real successes tonight in terms of feedback from what we're getting in this chat.
Excellent. Well, I'm pleased you guys had a chance to try it, because as Luke was saying, it's not really out in the world yet. So you've had a bit of a sneak preview before everyone else, and it's a relief to know that it's doing all right.
Yeah, no, definitely. And yeah, another Wayne says Chianti was a favorite for me. So, might have to be a photo finish. We'll have to go back to go to VAR and see who's won there.
Totally.
But I won't keep all of you too late. And thank you for your time, Andy. It's been a really good tasting. I hope everyone enjoyed it. It's a pleasure to have you back on. I know it's been a few weeks for those watching or listening or contributing as well. That it's been a few weeks since the last one, but we'll have plenty more coming down the line. Is there anything you want to finish on, Andy? Any points of order?
Um, nothing major. Just again, thank you, and also thank you all for bearing with me with my technical issues. I'm in a darkened room now, but I am sitting on the router to make sure that I get the best possible connection. And so yeah, I do apologize for that, and we sort of got there in the end, I think. So yeah.
Frank, for some reason, said, "Is Luke getting younger? Is it the whiskey? Yeah, it must be the whiskey, Frank. I'm definitely not getting younger. I can tell you that. But no, it's really great, Andy. And for the regulars on here, it would have been a nice novelty with the internet problems. And they would have loved watching me squirm. So I wouldn't worry about that side. But for anyone who's watching for the first time, thank you for your patience. And also, this isn't normally, in terms of those issues don't normally happen. So do join our next digital drams.
Luke,
But no, it's
one other thing, actually, someone was saying there that they're hoping to visit the distillery at some point. We technically aren't open to the public, but I wonder maybe if we should do a W Club members just tour of the distillery at some point.
yeah, I'm
We
definitely up for
can
that.
try and get.
Yeah. I mean, great. Your colleague Graham Sharp's on this call as well, or he was earlier on. I'm sure he could he could help facilitate that as well. So yeah, I'll be up
Absolutely.
for that. So yeah, that
There you
sounds
go.
good. So
Brilliant.
we could maybe take that offline, but I think that would be great. Bob says Gary Mills was a great tour guide. So there's a few people who've been there already.
Yeah.
But yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Excellent. Excellent.
Marvelous. Well, thank you, Andy, and thank you everyone for joining us. Keep an eye for our next digital drams. Digital drams to be on sale in the next week or so, and yeah, our Glen Scotia W Club Decanted podcast coming soon with Ashley Smith. So, brilliant. So, thanks, Andy. Enjoy your night, and we'll talk to everyone
Will do.
soon. Cheers.
Lovely. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.